Hi, hello, how are ya? I'm MangaKamen, and I like to talk about games! So, have you ever heard of Fnaf? Of course you have! What kind of stupid question is that? Fnaf is a game series that has just recently been declared 10 years old, and already the people who were teens when this came out are now entering the workforce, and that's much more scary than any animatronic nowadays. Fnaf has had its ups and downs, and I've dabbled into the series every once in a while on this channel, mostly with the film and Security Breach, both of which I did have issues with. While I certainly would consider myself a super fan of the series, I've shown an interest in it every once in a while. And in 2024, we recently got the newest addition to the Fnaf games. We were introduced to the game all the way back in January, made by MegaCat Studios, a company that has been around since 2016. That I can't say I'm too familiar with any of their titles, but a quick look shows they have a lot of experience with 2D and pixel art, and considering stuff like this, I'd say I'm already impressed with how they developed the game. If you're actually watching the screen, you can already tell this is quite a departure from the usual Fnaf affair. Not only because they're actually moving away from the 3D graphics and going into some expressive pixel art, Bonnie, pelvic thrust included, we've also changed into a side-scrolling adventure-esque game. And I obviously have a bit of a bias here since I do have a love for 2D-based games over 3D ones, but I will say that this game is probably one of my favorites of all time, especially when it comes to Fnaf. So today I want to explain why. I'll do my best not to get into spoilers, but just as a heads up to be on the safe side, there might be. Also, I don't really intend to go deep into how this game works in the entirety of FNAF's lore or such. I just want to look at this as a standalone title. Once again, I'm MangaKamen, and let's start this party. We begin our story of the game following Oswald, a timid kid whose family is going through a bit of a tough time. His father was let go from his job at the recently closed down mill and is struggling to make more money, even to the point where he has to leave Oswald at the local pizza joint for hours on end because the family can't afford daycare or sitter services during the summer. One day when Oswald is hanging out at Jep's Pizza, he manages to get into the back room where there's a closed off ball pit after overhearing about it from other customers. He jumps right into the ball pit. Oswald somehow finds himself in the past. Back when Jeff's Pizza was known as Freddy Fazbear's all the way back to 1985. This can't possibly go wrong! Yeah, he showed up right when shit goes down. When Oswald tries to escape, the yellow rabbit chases after him, jumps into the ball pit to continue his pursuit, grabs Oswald's father, dragging him in, but Oswald is able to save his own father. Except not really. Good job, kid! Turns out Oswald's dad is replaced by the yellow rabbit, with everyone seeing the ghastly creature as his father. So that's the prologue to the game, and it's up to Oswald to find a way to get his dad back, cause no one ain't gonna help him. Now, I'm sure there's already a few people out there who are in the comments typing this out, but this game is actually an adaptation of a previous FNAF story. It was in the Fazbear Frights anthology series, and then was later adapted into a comic book format. Cards on the table, I haven't read the story itself, but I have read the comic book adaptation, and obviously when you're adapting something for a game like this, you'll need to actually pad out the story for content. The comic, while having a prologue to the actual events where Oswald discovers the time-traveling ball pit, shows that he has been spending time at the library but then hanging out at Jeff's Pizza for lunch and waiting for his dad, showing the monotony of his summer life. Then when he discovers the ball pit, he spends some time going back and forth every day because time doesn't move forward while he's hanging out there. However, after his father is replaced by the yellow rabbit, Oswald is basically able to get back to his father one day after he gets taken. But in the game, there is numerous nights where he has to deal with this, and every night you're there, you're exploring the abandoned pizzeria trying to find your father and saving kids who got caught up in the panic. The game's story can be short. You can see it being completed in about 2 hours online, but that's mostly if you're just going through the motions and not doing all the mini games and trying to get the alternate endings. Yes, there are alternate endings, but I'm not expecting to go into length at them or how to get to them. That's mostly for you to discover. I do like the story, if I'm honest. I found Oswald to be a very relatable protagonist. As someone who grew up in a small town and often had to be left at a local daycare during the summer and after school, there are times I felt alone because I would be the only kid who didn't need adult supervision, and it was lonely. Not to mention having two parents who did work throughout the day made things hard, especially if they were able to pick me up late. Hell, in comparison to the last Fnaf protagonist I talked about on this channel, Oswald as a character worked a lot better for me. At least the kid knows how to use an accent and isn't annoying as all hell, unlike Gregory.
Know your fucking place, trash!
Also, he comes off as an actual kid who's scrambling around trying to fix something that was his fault, because it is. When you're a kid character in a horror game, the world is supposed to be big and scary, and the threats are more looming. Hell, there's really nothing Oswald can really do against the animatronics if they get their hands on him, unless button mashing counts. But in that situation, the helplessness works for a horror game. You know that I'm a longtime proponent against the whole your only choices are to run, hide, or die, ignoring there's a fourth choice of gagging me. I've never been much of a fan of that, especially when the characters in question are fully capable adults who could pick up a pipe and start whacking people who get up in your grill. But for a kid, that makes a lot more sense. At most you can do against robots that are twice your height is throw something at them, run, and hide, or distract them. So it doesn't really break my immersion with the story and the horror that the game has. And the fact that Oswald is throwing himself into the fray despite his fears and threats makes him a good character to play for the game, so I found it endearing and made me keep going because I wanted to help this kid out.
Shall I tell you of last night's dream? Dark forms came to me, whispering of unspeakable atrocities.
Stop with the dreams! You can try it!
Unlike the majority of Fnaf games, which would put you in a first-person point of view and were point-and-click survival games, which you would monitor the animatronics to keep an eye on your energy levels and such, Into the Pit decides to toss all that out and goes for a side view, which can actually matter for this kind of game. It does echo the old ideas of point-and-click adventures, only you have to control Oswald as a character in more real time with either a keyboard or controller, since there are times where you'll have to run from the animatronics in real time. And I personally like using a controller because only real Yakuza use controllers. You'll also have to find places to hide. Under tables, in the vents, sometimes even a Freddy Fazbear costume. Luckily, when you're close to places that you can interact with, you'll get a prompt to do the action, so you won't have to guess too much about it. There's limited time you get into a hiding spot though, and if you're spotted while hiding, well, good luck with that. You also keep track of some mini-games while hiding if the animatronics are close. Stuff like swatting away spiders was the most common that I saw, but we do have the occasional holding your breath as well. The mini-games aren't hard on paper, but when you're hiding from animatronics that want to kill you, it can be a little frantic at times. Though I question just how many spiders exist in this world, but then again, I always find them in the weirdest of places. You'll also want to keep an eye on your noise levels. Early in the game, you'll be given a noise gauge, and if you're running, you'll make more noise. And sometimes Oswald will trip and you'll make even more noise. The noise will often attract or alert the animatronics. Even some items like the mousetrap that you have will make noise, I think. That's how I viewed it. As with a lot of adventure games like this, you have to go around and gather items in order to get past certain animatronics or get further into the story. At one point, for example, you have to get a rat cage so you can get a rat. Bring it to Jeff's Pizza, unleash it, and while Jeff is distracted, you have to steal a piece of pizza that you use to distract Chica to save a kid. That isn't a complaint. It's just me explaining this kind of thing is necessary to get through the game, because there are times you have to get a specific item and do certain tasks with it. I think that's the longest item chain you have to do in order to pull this off in the game, and considering that I play Legend of Zelda games that have fetch quests and item trades, this isn't too egregious. And if you know what you're doing, you're more than likely able to get through the game faster and faster, which, considering that there are other difficulties, it seems like the game will want you to play more replays, and challenge yourself in said replays. The difficulty modes are as such. There's Creepy, which is the easy mode, and is one of the two difficulties that are available from the start. It's basically like if you are interested in the narrative of the game, which is honestly one of the more key elements of the game, so I understand why they put it there. There's Frightening, which is the normal mode for the game. Terrifying is the next difficulty after Frightening, and it's the hard mode. And sometimes when you use a thing that makes a noise, the creature will destroy them. And to point something out, I forgot, there's an autosave system, but in this mode, it won't autosave as much. And finally, Nightmare. This mode has permadeath! And like the last time, there won't be as much autosaving going on, and the creature will destroy more noisemakers. Also, if you're sadistic enough and want to make life more difficult for Oswald, you can actually turn off some of the hiding spots in the advanced difficulty. You can make the animatronics a lot more aggressive, and you can make hiding minigames harder as well. So if you really want to make a little kid suffer, well, there you go, sickos! Now obviously, these difficulty changes are used to improve replay value of the game. Looking at some playthroughs online, you'll see some people getting through the game rather quickly if they're blitzing through it. And fine enough, I guess. If there's one thing I want to point out, it's the endings. Yes, I know I said I wouldn't go into detail about them, but it's mostly a critique on how to get them as well as in conjunction with the item system. You see, most of the time when you get an item, you're more than likely use the item rather quickly, and as such there isn't a lot of depth with the items, with the exception of some collectibles which you'll need in order to get different endings. Again, I'm not going to say what they are, but it's pretty obvious once you start collecting them, as they don't have any immediate effect on the gameplay. But it's actually pretty paltry complaining about that. And then there are other things to consider, such as the flashlight that you get, and how you have to conserve your batteries. Of course, since there's an achievement that you can get without using your flashlight, you can get through the game without it, at your own peril. And you can also modify how the flashlight works in the advanced difficulties. From a gameplay perspective, Into the Pit is actually very solid, and I recommend it for that alone.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you your new national anthem.
I've stated before I'm a huge fan of 2D artwork, even more so when it comes to pixel art, and Into the Pit really knocked it out. There's just something about how fluid some of the sprites are, especially when they're moving. Although, sometimes it can be a little weird. Bonnie's gyrating hips, Jeff's melty face, and there are some idle animations that are used a little too fast. But those are really my only complaints in that regard, especially since there's a lot of time and effort put into the locations, and even more so when we get to the jump scares. There's a lot of detail with the pixel art, and to keep it really fluid is amazing. And while there aren't too many different environments, we're not talking about an entire open world like Security Breach, there are enough nooks and crannies to look for things. And what we do have does a good job with the presentation. The pizzeria, at least back in the past when everything goes down, has this haunting blue color to it, which helps display the other colors, but also gives this cold and uncaring feeling that adds to the atmosphere of the abandoned pizzeria. But like a lot of horror games, eventually you get used to the atmosphere, and sometimes you can find the animatronics to be a little dumb here and there. I will fully admit, I didn't find the game scary per se, but that's mostly a me thing. Granted, I chalk it up to most of the time we deal with the same animatronics that we've been dealing with for over a decade at this point, at least with a different covering. Still, there are a lot of details in the pixel art, and it works well with the game. There's also the music that does aid in the atmosphere. I do appreciate the fact that there's heavy breathing that can add to the tension of the game, although I recognize that could be my own interpretation. There are also even smaller things, like near the end of the game you can find Jeff playing solitaire on his computer, and it's actually animated well with pixel art. It's the small things and details like that I'm impressed with, even if it's inconsequential with the game itself. Small things I also want to give credit for is the transition when you go into the ball pit, where the balls will actually cover the screen before fading to black. I enjoy the one part where you actually do check on the cameras in the security office, which is an obvious callback to the original games. And I need to give credit to the jump scare cutscenes as well. Those are done really well. And like again, there are some people who are scared of this, but to me they do happen a little too fast to actually take effect. But the one that did get me was the one where you're in the vents. There's a lot of polish, and honestly speaking, my only complaint is that they didn't do more with this. Like have other animatronics from other games show up. Then again, that would require a lot more work and time, and I understand that. I'm a little annoyed that Fox didn't show up, but again, his whole stick was speed, and I could see that being an annoyance when running around. I think it's easy for anyone to see that I did enjoy the game for its pixel art, and I do hope that MegaCat Studios does more games in this style, because it's clearly one of their strengths.
Everyone died. The end.
That didn't help at all.
I'm sure I missed a lot with this game, but I do actually want to give credit to where it's at, especially since I do often levy a lot of criticism on the indie horror space, and I do attribute a lot of my issues to the genre to mascot horror. For better or for worse, the Fnaf games did change horror, and it has been that way for at least a decade, and over the course of that decade, I will admit there are games out there that I do have an issue with. Hell, one of the most popular videos is on that very subject, but I've also noticed that there's a bit of a swing happening, and it's been happening over the course of the last few years, where horror games are actually starting to feel like actual games again, and not just jump scare experiences 101 or walking simulator that's set in a spooky location. It's actually refreshing for me to say that horror games are feeling a lot more diverse and a lot more mechanically varied nowadays, and me saying that about a Fnaf game is beyond amazing to me. It's kind of telling to me that if you really were to compare Into the Pit and Security Breach, they do have similar gameplay elements, where you had to go around finding items, dodge the animatronics by hiding, and doing mini-games. Perhaps it's because Into the Pit is in pixel art? Maybe, but I'd also argue that Into the Pit is also smaller, and not just in playtime, but also in scope. Not to put down Security Breach too much in this video, but one of the bigger issues was that the Pizzaplex was too big. Having an open world is fine, but it did lack some direction at times, especially since at times it also felt unfinished since there were a lot of unused locations, whereas Into the Pit is a more contained experience, which is something you can say for a lot of the earlier entries in Fnaf, which is a good callback again. I know that the word linearity is a bit of a curse word in the gaming world, but just look at Ruin. It had light puzzles and a linear map that did help improve the basis that was Security Breach, and a lot of people actually preferred it and actually saw the weaknesses with Security Breach when it happened. Having a linear path is fine to have in games, and sometimes I'd argue that it's necessary since it helps keep your players focused on what you want them to do. So when we're given a specific goal to help Oswald save his dad, and it's in a more compressed setting where we're allowed to explore, it does feel like the formula is a more effective one than in Security Breach. Still, I do find Into the Pit to be a good addition to the Fnaf series, and after Security Breach, it feels like it's in the right direction for the series. I wonder if MegaCat Studios will continue to adapt the stories, or if they'll be allowed to make something original on their own, considering that they did manage to expand upon the story and make a solid game in the process. I can only see good things if they continue down this path either way though. Alright, I suppose I should do the usual YouTuber thing. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I'm MangaKamen. Have a good evening.